So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand.
Atheist and agnostic, as well as many types of religious.
That's ASMR, guys. Oh, shit.
We haven't even begun yet, and you're a mess.
If you haven't even taken a sip, and I'm a mess. This is why I don't imbibe. All right.
Hi, Katie.
Are we? We should introduce ourselves.
Well, let's do it. I don't think we've done that in a long time.
Okay. So I would start with, hi, everyone. My name's Katie.
Hi, I'm Preston.
And we are the Holy Watermelon Podcast. We have talked about a lot of spooky things in the last few weeks. And
This one gets a little dark, a little
it does. And we're like moving away from spooky to just like outright. It's not Spooktober anymore. And now we're just like an outright horrible. Today, we're talking about Jonestown.
Yep. The terrible misnamed Kool-Aid massacre.
Yes, I always point this out. Poor Kool-Aid.
Right? I mean, Kool-Aid is still around. Kool-Aid's still popular. Do you see Flavor Aid on the shelves anymore?
No. So, we're going to go through this pretty chronologically, but the massacre was facilitated with a knockoff brand called Flavor Aid, not actually Kool-Aid. So they did not drink the Kool-Aid.
Was that a knockoff or just a
different brand?
Competitor?
I don't know. I was born. I was born in the 90s. And with that, I will also quickly add, I feel like we're already digressing. Survivors and relatives of Jonestown victims actually find the term drink the Kool-Aid really offensive.
Yeah.
And Preston, there's a really good reason for that.
Yeah. The 78 Jonestown Juice Party was the single greatest loss of American life in a deliberate non-military action. And it held that title until 2001, September 11th.
Which is insanity. So I think, it's easy when you're born in the 90s to kind of make, and Jim Jones is a whack job.
Right.
To kind of make fun of this. But yeah, like over 900 people were killed. And there's video footage that's incredibly disturbing. I don't know if we need a trigger warning on this episode, but if you do decide to go YouTube any of the video footage, absolutely it is horrifying.
Yeah. So I didn't YouTube any of the footage, but the story of Jim Jones ended up being used in American Horror Story in their Apocalypse season. No, not Apocalypse. Cult.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's like the cult guy.
Yeah, so the weird thing is, I love American Horror Story. Cult actually had very little to do with the good old-fashioned cults, but there was one episode where they touched on the big ones. But it was mostly about the political cult in the States.
And he was a cult, but he almost wasn't. Like he came from very traditional, mainstream Christian backgrounds. He had some divergent beliefs, and even some of those weren't bad or weird, which we'll get into. But there is this switch that goes off in his head, and it absolutely changes from your regular old Sunday church to a death cult.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. It's all nuts.
It absolutely is. Let's start with the man himself, Mr. Jim Jones.
All right. So our boy Jimmy was born on May 13th, 1931. So that's a long time ago. In Crete, Indiana. He had a weird upbringing. His family was communist.
Yeah, he was a big old commie.
Yeah.
Which is one of those beliefs that's, like I said, divergent at the time, but not really that weird or dangerous.
Right. Well, people are super worried about communists thanks to everything that was happening in the world, especially after the Second World War, as he was a young adult.
Yeah, by the time he's in his 20s, the Red Scare is in full swing.
Yeah. But back to his youth, things were tough. His mother was pretty negligent. His father was a disabled World War I vet. And they just were poor all the time. And so Jimmy didn't make it to school, really, not with any regularity.
Now, this is one of a few red flags that we're going to come across. And obviously, not every child with negligent parents becomes a serial killer, but all serial killers have negligent parents.
Yeah.
Not all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, but all squares are rectangles. This is one of those situations where almost all serial killers have negligent parents. And Jimmy sure did.
Yeah. Bad stuff. Reflecting on his youth, he himself once said, "I was ready to kill by the end of the 3rd grade. I mean, I was so aggressive and hostile. I was ready to kill. Nobody gave me love, any understanding." In those days, a parent was supposed to go with a child to school functions. There was some kind of school performance, and everybody's parent was there but mine. I'm standing there alone, always was alone.
Which is really sad.
It is.
And it's amazing that it turned into that kind of aggression, which never left.
Yeah.
He was also, as a child, fascinated by religion and death. I believe he liked killing things, which is another trait of serial killers. Killing small animals.
Solid red flag.
Is a very solid red flag for serial killers. And he was a very charismatic child. Adults liked him. People just generally liked him. He was outgoing. He was happy to get up in front of an audience. And he attended Pentecostal church services, which are known to be a charismatic evangelical church group. So this is starting to pour that perfect cocktail as a death cult leader.
Yeah. Obviously, not everybody who has negligent parents and goes to a Pentecostal church is going to find all of the ingredients. But he did. He managed to weird people out. One of his childhood friends, Chuck Wilmore, later described him, saying that Jimmy was a really weird kid and that he was really impressed with how Hitler won against the Allied forces by killing himself in his bunker. That's a weird thing to latch on to.
That's a very interesting perspective, too, because demonstrably Hitler did not win. I mean, he wasn't taken in he didn't go to trial, he wasn't imprisoned, he wasn't executed for his war crimes, but he didn't win the war. So that's also very...
He went out on his own terms.
Sinister foreshadowing.
Absolutely it is. It's absolutely nuts.
That's all I have to say about that. When he was a teenager, Jones was one of those lovely, abrasively religious people that loves to tell their peers how to live their lives. He would disparage and remember, he's a teenager, he's in high school at this point. He would disparage his friends for drinking, smoking, dancing. You know, everyone's favorite person.
Good old Footloose.
Right?
Being enforced by your peers.
By your peers.
Rough.
I'm surprised he has. That's Katie. That's bad.
But, I mean, we know at least Chuck Wilmore identified himself as a friend. So
good guy, Chuck.
I never found great details, but I have to assume that Chuck Wilmore was also pretty into all these rules.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Jimmy wouldn't have had time for him.
That's true.
Who knows? Ancient history, kind of. So, in 1952, Jimmy became a Methodist minister and then later went on to become a Pentecostal preacher. And this was just some good experience to lead into his real solid cult leadership. But we'll get into that later.
And as we said, that in the 50s, Jimmy and his family faced a lot of government harassment. Again, this is in the thick of the Red Scare, as well as their neighbors because of their affiliation with the Communist Party. And this really just made Jimmy double down on his communist beliefs.
Yeah, like most people, you say, hey, don't do that. If you liked it to begin with, you're going to lean into it harder.
You don't know me.
Right? You just don't get it.
You don't get it, Dad. Just don't get me. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, he was also a huge fan of integration, which was really unpopular at the time. He hated racism in all its forms in a time where things were getting ready to bust out into riots all over the nation. So he was on the right side of this argument.
Which is where I find this part so interesting. And then obviously in the 50s, people would just say, hey, good guy Jimmy, if you're for integration or a black person. But knowing how evil he becomes, it's really weird for someone to be it's so kind in that it messes with my head.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it really helped out when he was trying to build a religion. If he could really make people feel loved and welcome, that's something a lot of people weren't getting out in the broader community.
Yeah, he was able to grow a huge church because of integration.
Which might feel a little bit like love bombing in some situations. When we talked about cults before, in general, that was on our list of red flags. So Jimmy had some weird personal beliefs, though. According to Joyce Houston, who used to belong to the People's Temple, Jimmy believed that he was the only heterosexual on the planet.
Preston, I had no idea.
We see a lot of weird rhetoric coming from the involuntary celibate community online. Those good old incels saying real weird things like loving a woman is gay. True if you're a woman. Not if you're a man. Anyway, yeah, Jimmy was really adamant, at least for a little while. I mean, we don't have a long history of this rhetoric, but we have some, that he was the only heterosexual man on the planet.
Wow.
All men were gay except him. All women were lesbians. And everybody who showed any interest in straight sex was just compensating to fit in.
It's a lot of people fitting in.
Right? I mean, if everybody was gay, this would not be happening.
No, they would all just go for it.
Right? So the irony here
also
Jimmy,
wouldn't last very long.
Right?
I mean,
species would die.
I hate the, protect the family argument. But yeah, if you're the only straight man on the planet, that wouldn't last very long.
Yeah. So the irony here that Jimmy saying he's the only heterosexual on the planet. In 1973, there was some testimony that came out that Jimmy had raped a male congregant.
Oh.
Meaning Jimmy's not as straight as he says he is. Problematic. I mean, there's so
several
many
layers of problems there, Preston.
The behavior is a problem in itself, in the instance itself. And then the speech around it, even more so. Well, no, not even more so. It compounds it, but it's not as bad as the original rape. That's
really bad.
Taking the cake right there. That is the big one.
Yeah.
And probably wasn't just one time. Probably wasn't just one person. And, of course, there's coercion in other situations as well that, yeah. Bad things. Bad dude.
Yeah. I mean,
No
this
good guy,
is in the 70s, and this is where he really starts to go drastically downhill. The massacre again did happen in 1978. So 1973 is 5 years before that. So he's really in his mental decline at this point.
Yeah. And then I found a headline while I was going through digging for stuff that made it look a little bit like he had beat Pee Wee Herman to the whole theater punch by almost 20 years.
Wow.
But I did more digging past the headlines, as a responsible reader should do, and found that the story is a little bit more interesting. He wasn't just chilling out in the theater watching a movie, enjoying himself. No. On December 13th, 1973, while attending a theater in LA, a cop came in to talk to Jimmy. Jimmy waved at him and said, come join me up here in the balcony. And the cop is like, no, come with me, walks into the men's bathroom. So Jimmy walks into the bathroom with this male police officer. And the story is that while Jimmy was in the bathroom, he started masturbating. And, any reasonable human being, when trying to converse with somebody who sees the other person start masturbating, would have, an issue with this. So he was arrested for masturbating in that public bathroom.
I mean, fair.
So not quite a Pee Wee Herman situation, but, exciting and sheds a little bit more light on the mental state broadly of this fella.
Oh, he's just, like you said, a wackadoodle.
Yeah.
Cuckoo bananas.
Right. So it went to court. And the file, everything got sealed. Nobody was allowed to hear about this because the judge was like, no, this is nonsense. And he was acquitted and all that fun stuff. And then after he died, the judges are like, let's open this up again because
he's crazy.
It counts as evidence that this dude's been nuts the whole time.
Yeah. Then in a 1976 interview, 2 years before the massacre, so again, kind of right in the thick of it, Jones actually came out and said he was an atheist. So that's super interesting. Power for the sake of power. Even after a teenager, I mean, that's a commitment to some greater, and I don't mean greater as a good purpose, I mean greater as a bigger purpose of becoming a minister, all that schooling you need, starting a congregation again at this point, People's Temple is thriving. Yeah, that's a big wool to pull over everyone's eyes.
Right? Well, it's not like this was like a private discussion that nobody ever heard over the next couple of years. This was a thing that got published.
Yep. Interviews get published.
Yeah. So it's like people just stuck around, which tells you a little bit about the kind of power that he had over this group that was not super religious in ways that you would expect. There wasn't a strong... It wasn't strong theology necessarily. It was your basic Christian theology, but it was a very strong community. Well, and they were pretty light on any sort of differences from the mainstream theologically.
Yeah.
It was until it started looking more like, hey, we're worshiping this dude.
Jim Jones instead of Jesus.
Yeah. And
that's right, I said Jesus.
Yeah, I noticed.
Jesus.
Just let it go.
Thank you.
It's just so weird. Well, let's get more into this People's Temple, this whole deal.
Absolutely. So Jones's first church was the Community Unity Church, which he founded in 1954. After the Methodist Church, he pastored at barred Black congregants. So again,
let's bail on them because they're racist.
Yep.
Yeah. Easy to get on board with that decision.
And it was at this church that Jim Jones started doing faith healings, which is super core to how the People's Temple grew and grew so quickly. He loved doing faith healings because of the publicity and the money that it brought.
Oh yeah, if you can do miracles, obviously you deserve my money, because what if I need those miracles for myself?
Right. And so, of course, these were fake.
Yeah.
Members of the church that participated knew full well that they were acting. People were brought in, and as he got more popular, he just didn't have time for actually sick people. He would always have too many people ahead in the line that were his congregants.
So I did some digging into this because we need details, especially some fun, juicy ones. So they weren't just actors saying, they feel better. They put on full cancer prosthetics to remove. Really intense, great stage stuff. And so the Indiana State Psychology Board started investigating, and they asked for tissue samples of these chunks of body that are falling off people when they get healed, which, of course, pissed off the congregation leadership. No, you can't have that stuff because you'll find out. Which, super obvious that it's a scam.
Yeah.
But they went even further to make things more convincing. They actually drugged a woman named Irene Mason. And while she was unconscious, they put a cast on her arm. And then when she woke up, they're like, oh yeah, no, you broke your arm. That's why you're in hospital now. And so, okay, well, that's weird. I don't know why I don't remember that. And go to church like we do. And so Jim Jones brings her up onto the stage, cuts off the cast, and does his blessing thing to heal her. And bam, that arm is fine. Because it was never broken. It was just cast while she was unconscious.
Yeah, there was a great video I watched researching for this. There's a ton of great stuff on YouTube on Jim Jones, parts of documentary, actual footage. And there's a lady. She's actually a phenomenal actor. I will give this to her. She's a little old lady, and she's in a wheelchair, and she's never walked before. And Jim Jones commands her to heal, and she ends up running around the church with her arms over her head. And
that's a hell of a miracle.
It's a hell of a...
If you don't use your legs, there's no muscle to run.
Even if your paralysis is miraculously healed, you haven't stood on them. And
right? All of the effects of atrophy. Oh, yeah. A miracle indeed.
A miracle. Praise be.
So in 1956, Jim Jones, he got real popular with this. The believers never stopped believing. and he became a minister with the Independent Assemblies of God. And eventually the congregation he built would be known as the People's Temple Christian Church Full Gospel.
I'm glad he
That's a
shortened.
mouthful.
Yeah, I'm glad he shortened that.
But it looked pretty good. It would have to attract people. And I mean, people were progressive, accepting people of different backgrounds and ethnicities, like we mentioned, super anti-racist, pretty cool. And just the group of people as it was as a congregation,
I just said that.
people really were flocking to that.
The energy in the community that
Yeah.
he was building.
Yeah.
Just like not quite just like we're trying to build here. We're not building a death cult, just a regular cult.
Not a danger.
Not a danger cult.
Yeah. Catherine Barber, who was an ex-member of the People's Temple, said the people were the attraction of the temple. So much of it was revolving around Jim Jones, and he was the one who was always given the credit for everything, but the people were the attraction. It was amazing to be walking into a place and have African Americans really warmly welcoming you and talking to you and sharing stories with you. It was sweet. So I couldn't find whether or not she was African American. I would guess the way that's worded, she was probably white.
I don't know. Laura Johnston Cole, another ex-member, said, "We all felt that we were a family rather than a church. We, all of us, were doing the right things, but in the wrong place with the wrong leader."
Yeah, so people liked it. I mean, you don't stay in a place that you don't like until it's too late to leave. And we're not there yet. It's not too late to leave.
Yes, and Jim Jones made it very hard to leave, too. Even when people knew, I don't want him to head too far, but even when people knew it was bad, it's hard to get out of South America.
Right?
We'll get there.
Yeah. It's just, I think it's interesting that when we talk about a lot of the big cults historically, like Charles Manson, people are really drawn to that one central figure, and they really want to latch onto him, try and get into that inner circle. And that was kind of a little bit part of what we saw in the People's Temple, but generally people just really wanted to belong to the group.
They came for the faith healing and stayed for the community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough.
At least generally speaking. There's certainly
obviously,
exceptions.
absolutely. Jones wanted the church to be a rainbow family. His own family included an adoptive Native American girl, 3 Korean kids, an African American boy he named Jimmy Jr., and a white boy named Tim.
Yeah, he did have one natural son with his wife that he ended up naming Stephen Gandhi.
Okay, Jim.
Right? I mean, you're a white guy with a pretty white name. Naming your son Gandhi feels weird. But you do what you do. You're allowed to name your kids whatever you want, generally speaking, in most jurisdictions.
Cotton.
And he did end up having a few kids with other women from the People's Temple, which is interesting. We'll talk about Father Divine next. One of the things that he adopted from Father Divine's teachings was the idea that nobody should be having sex and that you should just adopt kids from families that are breaking this rule. But he still had kids of his own with more than one woman.
I mean, I think more people should adopt and foster than do. There's lots of kids
For
without
sure.
homes.
Yeah. And so I'm fully on board with his
Don't
principle of
steal
you should
people's
adopt.
children.
But, we'll get into a situation that looks a lot like that later, too.
Oh, no.
Lots of problems, cult leader style.
Yeah. Like, this is definitely a flawed idea.
Yeah.
But
Jim encouraged the People's Temple to be deliberately diverse and actually specifically asked the people to adopt kids from Korea in particular because of the whole Korean War thing. A lot of kids without parents were around. So, I mean, it sounds really good until you realize what's happening to these kids. It gets really creepy.
Oh, no. Tell me about Father Divine.
Yeah, so as he was trying to expand his cult, he started reading some of the writings of Father Divine, watching videos of Father Divine's sermons, and he got actually pretty much obsessed with this guy for a little while. And Father Divine had this weird habit of getting people to think that he was a god, which really inspired Jimmy. So
I was going to say, is that a habit? Can I start that habit?
I mean, in theory, you could. So Jimmy decided, well, I need to go down and study with this guy. And he did for a few years. Eventually, well, back to Father Divine first. So he was the founder of the Peace Mission Movement, which started back in the 1910s.
Wow.
This had been around for decades and was growing decently by the time Jim got to find out about it. And he had a multi-ethnic congregation, which was right up Jim's alley. It was pretty great. I mean, he also taught a lot of really weird things. Bible's no good. It was translated by King James himself rather than by a whole bunch of scholars that just got approval from King James. Weird thing to believe, but...
That feels like a lot of work for King James. I'm trying to read the Bible, and that's a lot of work on its own.
Right. He was too busy writing demonology.
All right.
Anyway, this dude, crazy nuts.
Cuckoo bananas.
Yeah. Absolute mess. But in such a powerful way that people followed him, including Jimmy. He died in 1965, and Jimmy swooped in to take over the peace mission. He wanted that bad. It's
All right.
the exact style of congregation. And
They think you're God.
yeah,
I'm
huge amount
down.
of power he had. He didn't manage to pull it off, but he did manage to take some people back to California with him. Weird flavor stuff. Not really Christian. Like it had started out Christian, just like Jimmy did, and went
say it.
really all worship me.
Cuckoo bananas.
Cuckoo bananas.
I couldn't even say it. I got too excited.
Yeah. So, like Father Divine, Jimmy hated the Bible, in particular the King James Version. He blamed the king for the corruption of the text that obscured the true gospel, and that the king's capitalism would be the downfall of America, which, of course, he had to compare to what was in the Bible, the Babylon of John's Revelation.
Thinks the King of England will be the downfall of America.
His capitalism.
Oh,
Yeah, King James was a capitalist, the creator of the slave trade,
okay.
and all of that brought over to America with the King James Bible tradition. It's hard to follow because it's not true.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Well, and again, a deceased king in a foreign country is not going to be.
I mean, America was largely initially populated by Brits.
Absolutely, but not by the 1960s. Anyway, it just feels very far removed.
Yeah.
I'm blaming Queen Victoria for the downfall of Canada. It's too long ago. Anyway.
Right?
So we know that Jim Jones and the People's Temple ends up in Guyana in South America. And the move to Guyana was one of several moves that the last move that the People's Temple made. After receiving criticism for integrating his congregation, Jim Jones moved his family and about 70 people from the temple in Indiana to Redwood Valley, California. So he told everyone that there was going to be a nuclear attack on July 15th, 1967.
That's a hell of a prediction.
Yeah. And this deadline convinced people to go to what Esquire magazine had called one of the safest places in the world in such an event.
It was upwind from all the really good military targets.
And small enough it wouldn't be a target.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Of course, just like with all death cults, this attack never happened.
But it came close. I mean, almost.
Yeah.
In May of 1967, just a couple of months before this predicted attack, there was a solar storm that knocked out NORAD early warning radars. And so America was super on edge, like, oh no, is this an initial strike from Russia before they bomb all of America in, the heat of the Cold War? Of course, that got solved relatively quickly, and there was realization it was a false alarm, just solar flare.
Whew.
No nuclear attack.
From Redwood Valley, the People's Temple expanded to both Los Angeles and San Francisco. Temple got really popular in California in the 60s. Yeah.
Yeah, hippy dippy time.
Drawing in thousands of locals and all sorts of politicians, including Harvey Milk, the one most famously played by Sean Penn.
It wasn't until the late 60s that Jimmy openly talked about apostolic communism. He had, let it be known that he leaned pretty hard to the left, but still within what was socially appropriate under the Red Scare. But late 60s is like, fine, you know what? It's time. I'm a Marxist. Yeah. And I mean, he got in trouble. He got more government observation, but it didn't really ruin things for him. And the church really wasn't hurt too badly by it. People were committed to it. People give their money to the church in exchange for having all of their needs satisfied. It's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
As long as you have enough people bringing in enough money that everyone's needs can still be satisfied, you're golden. And so he was really convinced that Marx was right, that religion is the opiate of the masses. So he fully leaned away from Christian theology, would talk about himself as a Messiah type figure, but religion was a thing that needed to be walked away from, and instead just work on hang out with each other, spend Christmas and Thanksgiving just with people from the congregation.
Fellowshipping.
Yeah. And like specifically, don't go hang out with your blood family, be with your covenant family.
Which, as we know, is a bite model. Red flag.
Yeah, that kind of control is not ideal.
Yep. Now, the real hero of the People's Temple is Mr. Muggs. The church had a mascot for a little while. A chimpanzee named Mr. Muggs.
Yeah.
Jim told people that Mr. Muggs was rescued from a lab. But Jeff Gwynne, Jones's biographer, says he just bought him at a pet store. And the 1960s were wild. Man, if you lived in the 1960s, please email me at holywatermelonpod@gmail.com.
I just remembered a movie that I watched as a kid.
Oh.
And it wasn't new when I watched it as a kid. It was called Monkey Shines.
Oh, no.
People were so obsessed with monkeys in the 60s, 70s, 80s,
Why?
90s that people would buy monkeys.
Yeah, Jim Jones sold monkeys, guys.
Yeah.
The 60s were
them door to door.
The 60s were fucking wild.
So Monkey Shines, the movie that just came to my head that I have to tell you a little bit about.
Okay. Lay it on us.
It's about this quadriplegic. He's stuck in his chair. He's, moving around with a little stick in his mouth. And he gets a monkey to help him out around the house. And the Shine is psychic.
No, that's weird.
Monkey, and he gets all kinds of stuff done.
Is it endearing? Because it sounds creepy.
The first third of the movie is pretty good. Everything's hunky dory.
Okay.
And then things turn dark.
Because I was gonna say this sounds like a fucking horror movie.
The dude and the paraplegic gets some negative feelings about the people around him, and the monkey starts killing them.
What? No.
A thing that monkeys and chimps are known to do when you keep them as pets.
Kids, don't buy monkeys from door-to-door salesmen. I don't think that's a thing anymore, but don't do it.
It's been a long time since I've seen a door-to-door salesman for anything other than religion.
Said by our resident Mormon. So we got a letter from a Jehovah's Witness in our neighborhood, and Bryant wrote "Return to sender" and "Hail Satan" on it and put it in the mailbox. And the postman put it back in our mailbox because of the "Hail Satan." I was like, you should have just put "Return to sender," but thanks, babe.
And you just put "Hail Satan" on the other side of the envelope next time you try.
Well, and they have a return address, so I actually just want to send them a letter that's like, "Hail Satan." Please stop mailing us. Save a tree. Instead of anyway. I digress.
Every time I try to study with the Jehovah's Witnesses, I get one visit and they never want to come back.
You need to...
It makes it really frustrating to maintain a conversation over several visits.
We should find an ex-Jehovah's Witness. We'd probably have more success.
I do know a few.
I do too. All right. We have had that little aside now. Jonestown, Guyana. It was named after Jim Jones.
Of course it was. Who else would it be named after?
So Jonestown started because Jim was getting more and more paranoid. So in the early 70s, the temple was already being accused of fraud and abuse. Rightly so.
Well, and a lot of cults have done the whole let's leave America to avoid government supervision and whatnot. Usually Mexico, somewhere close by. Nah, bro, let's go to South America.
Let's go to South America. Jones, also being an integrationist and a communist, probably didn't help matters with him being watched closely by officials.
Yeah.
And he chose to build his Utopia in Guyana. So Guyana is a country in the northwest part of South America. It's just kind of like south of the Caribbean islands.
Nice and diverse. You got a lot of people who are involuntarily immigrated from India, from Africa, a good handful of European descent options.
There's still a large indigenous population, which is quite unique for South America being colonized.
Right. So it's actually a pretty nice place for Jones' whole rainbow family idea.
Absolutely. And there were prominent Black leaders in Guyana, so something to make his Black congregants feel really comfortable. And it was an English-speaking and socialist country, so checks all the boxes for a whole bunch of people who have probably never left the United States before.
Right. It's the perfect place to set up this little
literally a commune in a socialist country.
Yeah.
Also, I love that he is living the communist life.
Right? I mean, even China and Russia never really committed to the communist
like
life.
this. So Jones purchased 3,800 acres of jungle west of Georgetown, the capital. And 500 members of the temple went down to clear literal jungle, vines, palm trees, to venomous snakes, probably giant spiders, things like
there's a lot of things that make me not want to go.
I know. I was in the jungle in Guatemala.
Mm-hmm.
It was enough.
You need more secure shelter to go to sleep at night.
Yeah, I mean we were good. But I don't want to know what those first few nights and
right.
So I'm fine. It gets worse. I don't know why I'm freaking out about clearing a jungle when they're all about to die.
Right? Yeah. So we talked a little bit about some of the red flags, controlling people's time and whatnot. Tell me about white knights.
White knights are terrifying. If your organization practices white knights, you are in a danger cult. Leave immediately. White knight at Jonestown was a suicide drill. A fire drill is where you practice if there's a fire. Mm-hmm. A suicide drill is where you practice killing yourself. Really good. I feel like
healthy thing.
I feel like I should put a trigger warning before I go any further. The intensity of white knights would vary. So on one or two occasions, community members would arm themselves with weapon and stay up for days at a time, waiting for this impending invasion. Mm. Some instances were less intense and simply called upon people to pledge their willingness to die in front of the congregation. These would happen randomly and in the middle of the night, which is, what is going on is a scary red flag, but the random in the middle of the night is also a huge red flag in the bite model of manipulation and deprivation of sleep. Mm-hmm. So you are no longer thinking straight during the day because you're literally sleep deprived. So these intensified leading up to November 18th, the frequency increased leading up to November 18th, 1978.
There's an interesting story to the lead up of all this massacre.
This has been a long time coming, which is almost scarier. It's scarier. Right.
So in 1972, we're looking back a few years right now, Grace Stone, who was a member of People's Temple, gave birth to a little boy named John. Jim Jones claimed to be the father, even though Grace had a husband named Tim. So I have to assume that Jim and Grace have been sleeping together. That seems like a reasonable conclusion here. The weird thing is, Jimmy didn't like people being romantic or sexual and told people don't do it, but you're the exception to the rules, Jimmy. You do your thing. Anyway, Tim, Grace's husband, signed an affidavit confirming that Jimmy was the baby's daddy without getting a paternity test.
Wow.
Yeah. Weird move. 4 years later, Grace abandons her family to escape the cult. And then her husband left a year after that, leaving little John with Jimmy and the cult.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So they went to the U.S. courts to try and get John back. Let's get the power of great America to bring our kid back from Guyana. They got some traction. One of the congressmen from California, Leo Ryan, went to Guyana with several family members of people who were still trapped in the cult. Like a small army. Let's get our family back. And things, well, didn't go super well. Some of the congregants told Leo that they wanted help leaving. The people who were in Guyana, hey, take me with you when you go, which was the goal. So that's kind of cool. But this really pissed Jimmy off. So when they were waiting to get onto the airstrip, or to get onto the plane at the airstrip, Jimmy had a truck of gunmen keep them from leaving by killing them.
Oh.
They killed Leo Ryan and 4 others and wounded a whole bunch more. And Jimmy then told his faithful congregants that the Guyanese military was going to come and take their children, which is easy enough to believe because they just had people come and try to take the children.
Yep.
So that really sucks. And the only way to prevent that was for everybody to take Hitler's way out. Bad day for everyone involved.
Absolutely. So some people have described the death of over 900 people on November 18, 1970 as a mass suicide, but is very much a mass murder, as audio and video recordings, which again you can find on YouTube, and they're very disturbing.
Haunting.
Demonstrate that people were coerced to drink the cyanide-laced Flavor Aid. Basically, they held a gun to your head. It was, which way do you want to go? Because you're going. 300 of the deaths were of minors.
Yeah. Fewer than 10% of the people present survived the Jonestown massacre. That's really bad.
Right? And, it's a little bit of apples to oranges, but if you think of the number of people at Ground Zero, and obviously there was a huge loss of life on September 11th, definitely more than 10% of people survived. So this is scary numbers. Like, no, I don't want to say nobody made it out alive, but a very lucky few. There's probably some survivor's guilt there.
Yeah. There was about 11 people escaped into the jungle. Of course, we mentioned some people died on the airstrip. There were 14 who survived the gun attack. Wounded, of course, most of them. 4 people survived the Flavor Aid cyanide because they hid or played dead. I wonder if any of them pretended to drink and then played dead, or if they just.
I read 2, and one lady hid under a bed, and there were guards checking rooms, so she was very lucky.
Wow.
Yeah, everyone was called out to where this was. It was outside, and she hid under a bed. And then one person claimed to have not heard what Jim was asking people to do, but when he saw people falling down dead, he swooned and laid there until it was over. Could you imagine being one of those 4 people walking? And there's footage. Like I said, if you have any sort of morbid curiosity, there's footage of 900 bodies laying there. I don't know if I would want to be one of those 4 people.
God, no. No. Yeah. And the murder-suicides weren't just limited to Guyana. Radio orders were released by Jones to everywhere where the church had any sort of presence, that it was time to commit revolutionary suicide.
And some people did kill themselves or the people they were with, or killed the people they were with and then themselves, and then some people didn't. So if you were in America, you had a higher chance, depending on who you were standing next to when those orders came in.
Yeah. So Jim was found with a gunshot wound in the head, which tells us that he couldn't stomach the idea of drinking cyanide. Like a quitter. His nurse, Annie Moore, was also found in a similar state. And I think it's really interesting that there remains some confusion about which of the 2 pulled the trigger on the other before killing themselves. It's a little bit weird.
That's interesting.
Yeah. There's authoritative voices saying both sides of the story.
Interesting.
Both of these options.
And there'd be no witnesses, so.
Right. It's just crazy. Mr. Muggs, the chimp,
was
also shot and killed that day because they couldn't convince him to drink the Flavor Aid. So it was Time for the bullets.
Poor Mr. Muggs.
Yeah. And of the small number of survivors, some of them later killed themselves out of guilt or despair. Others, like Mike Prokes, defended the group after the massacre, but then went on to kill himself. Mike killed himself in a hotel room just so that he could die faithfully like those in Guyana.
Wow.
Yeah. And to be with the group, there was a young man who I did read his name, and I don't want to share it. You can go dig it up if you want on your own, who had his family all die in the massacre. And then he decided, well, it's time for me to go on a murder-suicide rampage in a schoolyard.
Ugh.
Yeah. So that happened in LA very shortly after the massacre. And then many others who escaped before and after the massacre, like Al and Jeannie Mills, were tracked down by faithful members of the congregation and were murdered in their homes. So it's not just Jonestown, but it was a much bigger problem.
Absolutely.
That lasted for a little while.
Yep. It's wild.
Yeah. Danger cults. We need to be better at recognizing them before they get to this level of scary.
Yeah. There are other danger cults and other death cults, but I think Jim Jones kind of takes the cake from I want to say pop culture is probably the wrong word, but he's probably the best known death cult leader.
For sheer numbers alone,
yeah,
gained him that spot for sure. And the scary thing is, it all sounded, at the very least, decent.
It was
started.
It was great until it wasn't.
Yeah, that's the trick. That's always the way it is. Whether it's NXIVM or Scientology or who knows what the next one's going to be, it's good until it's not.
Yeah, belief is a crazy drug,
right?
And I mean, I guess all you can do is teach people about the bite model and how to recognize it in both the groups you're involved with and then your friends and family's behavior, because there were definitely red flags. But if you had dedicated 10 years to the People's Temple,
that's your whole life.
It's your entire life.
Red flags is enough.
And then even if you did remove yourself, you weren't safe necessarily.
Right.
I don't know how to wrap this up. I'm sad.
Yeah, it's bad news. It's weird because before things got really weird, before people were in too deep to get out, for the most part, they were not really talking about anything that was weird relative to what every other church was.
No, I mean, the faith healings were a bit out there, but it was the 60s and...
People are still doing faith healings.
Well, it was the 60s and people sold monkeys door to door. There was weirder shit happening.
Yeah.
Brutal. Pet rocks were popular, and
when did that start?
I don't know. I'm not that old, Preston.
Okay. Well, anyway, what was the name of our episode where we talked about the bite model? Fake Me to Church.
Fake Me to Church.
Yeah. For some more detail on cults in general, Fake Me to Church talks about a lot of the red flags.
We also have a lovely interview with our good friend Sarah, who talks about her experience in a cult. She was obviously not in the People's Temple because she's far too young for that.
Yep.
But she does talk about her experience as well. Just, again, good to be aware of these red flags. Even if you just Google the bite model, it breaks it down very nicely.
Yeah. A couple of months ago, we had a nice chat about communism, and in particular religious communism, that helps give a little bit of context to how these people were living as well.
Look at how our episodes are just building on each other, Preston.
Right? I feel like our plan is starting to really show itself.
Careful, that makes it sound like a danger cult. Yeah, just wait until July 15th, 2023. When the world ends. No, I'm kidding. And our plan comes to fruition. We're kidding. We're just going to keep recording this until you're sick of us.
Yeah. I mean, so far it hasn't stopped being fun. And we have a lot of fun with many of our listeners on Discord, Facebook, YouTube,
Instagram. Hey, Preston, if our listeners wanted to flesh out more of their learning and get a deeper understanding, is there a resource for that?
We've got actually a whole bunch of bonus episodes that are
What?
exclusive to Patreon that we've also had a lot of fun recording those.
And did you guys hear about our Patreon book club?
Man, we're going to have some fun with that.
Yeah, so it's a completely separate tier for the price of $5 a month. Every 2 months, we are going to read a book with you guys and have a discussion with our lovely patrons. So if that sounds super interesting to you, subscribe today. Peace be with you.
To enlightenment and salvation for
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecies had fulfilled itself.
God is near.